Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 72, featuring Renz Chong. Thanks for joining us, Renz. He's a co-founder and CEO of BreederDAO, which is a leading, pioneering Web3 gaming organization. And I'm really excited to have you here to be able to ask you some questions about Web3 gaming and kind of where I see things evolving. Thanks for joining, Renz. How you doing?
I'm good, luck, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to share it with your community as well and to just chat with you in general.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. This is Web3 Warriors. My name's David Chroma, your host. I go by Chrome in the metaverse, and I want to thank you for joining us. As always, we're just pushing the space forward, focusing on the creator economy in the Web3 space, the power of the technology to change lives and open up opportunities, and really advocate for kind of the power of the technology more so than the potential for financial gain or some of the other kind of messaging that you hear in the Web3 and NFT corners. And with that, today we're going to be talking about a topic that we love to revisit from time to time, and that is Web3 gaming, the potential for the metaverse, the potential for gaming as we know it, which is a multi-billion-dollar, if not trillion-dollar industry, and how it can evolve into this blockchain and crypto space and actually take advantage of this new reality, which is that digital assets can be given real world value on the blockchain, and we've spoken to a lot of creators, wearables developers, 3D builders, and just really inspiring builders in the space in Web3 and in the metaverse that have shown us the power of what's possible when you connect the blockchain to the gaming space. So it's going to be really cool to be able to speak to Renz here about, what's the importance of having a DAO, having an organization and community that's committed to Web3 gaming and committed to pushing things forward, and what are some of the hurdles that we face. I think in the Web3 gaming space, you find this interesting intersection of gamers and developers and artists, and of course some traders who are maybe speculating a little bit and want to be able to flip some assets and hope that they make some money. There's a little bit of that too, and what I've heard a lot of, because I was a gamer before I was in Web3, before I got into blockchain and crypto, and I still hear it to today, is a lot of concern around, why should gaming be something that you earn money from necessarily? Like, of course, we know there are content creators and real professional, quote unquote, gamers who are able to make a lot of money already in gaming, right? But should the actual act of playing a video game always earn you some money? I think it's an open debate still. And so there's a lot of pushback in the gaming space, to that concept. But on the flip side, we know we're making, gaming companies, gaming industry corporations, a lot of money, right? So why shouldn't we get a little bit of that back? And more so the creators, right? The 3D builders, the people that are actually creating the digital assets that we all enjoy. Right now, they're kind of getting the short end of the stick because the big corporations take the lion's share of the profits, right? So in this new world where you can actually create something from scratch, sell it as a digital asset in a video game that people are already enjoying and loving, you can imagine how that could potentially have a flywheel effect and really create a whole new world of opportunities in the gaming space. And so that's how we're kind of pushing back against this concept of like, oh, it's all about money. It's all about, making every video game, pay you. I don't think that's necessarily what it's about. I think it's just about, realizing new value in the gaming space. So with that, I could go on for a long time about thoughts on Web3 gaming, but we've got a real expert here, Renz, and I'm so glad that you're able to join us. So before we get into BreederDAO and your organization and what you're working on, maybe you could just give us a little bit of background on, what brought you to Web3, what brought you to blockchain, and thank you again for joining. Welcome.
Sure, happy to. I'm actually going to lead with what you said earlier, which is the power of blockchain in terms of like changing lives, because that's one of the reasons that why I actually got into the space even. So maybe just to provide some history, right? I'm an ex-consultant, did a lot of like back-end work for a lot of like these huge corporations. Ended up realizing that, the impact that I'm doing isn't making much of a dent aside from putting monies to the rich, right? So I eventually realized that, maybe the real impact is actually in startups, right? Where I get to really explore and touch lives of like bigger or like even smaller individuals, right? So one that's most prominent that I actually joined would be Angkas, which is a backriding service here in the Philippines. And in a way, it actually provided for an alternative mode of transportation for people here. And you can imagine, because of the road and traffic situation here, where it takes us maybe an hour to get or to drive like 6 kilometers. It's
Wow.
actually actually a lot of like lost in terms of like efficiency and like money just for transportation. So having a better means of transportation is actually very crucial here, especially if we want to improve the lives of ordinary individuals. And so that really inspired me to actually do something more for people, right? And so since then I jumped from one startup to another until I eventually landed in, or I learned about like Axie Infinity. Now for context, I've been trading crypto myself since 2017, but
Nice.
back in 2019 I learned about DeFi and then eventually learned about Axie Infinity.
Mm.
What's interesting is that I think a lot of people already know this, that during the pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs here in the Philippines, and Axie Infinity kind of became like the knight in shining armor of a lot of individuals, where to be able to sustain their daily lives, they were playing, right? And it kind of became like a thing here, where instead of doing a 9 to 5 job or a 9 to 6 job, people would just play, and they get to earn some money, which was quite an interesting concept because why would someone pay you just to actually play a game, right? And so that kind of concept appealed to me. And um personally, I'm an avid gamer myself, and one of my biggest frustrations is that every time I purchase an asset from a particular game, and we all know it's a cycle within games that after some time you get bored and you move on from like a game, right?
Yeah.
You got nothing to do with your assets. Like news about like Call of Duty, for example, migrating to a different version, and then you not being able to bring your stuff right from one platform to another, or news about like CS:GO selling a lot of these assets for 7 figures, right?
Yeah, it's
But
wild.
users don't really own them, right? So what is happening? And here comes Axie Infinity, which actually shows you, that these assets that you generate are ultimately yours, and you can do whatever it is that you want with regards to it. And so that kind of concept really just clicked to me. And being situated in the Philippines helped a lot because you see left and right, people are asking for assets, asking for axes. Everyone's creating their own guild. And so when we saw that phenomenon, we were like, why don't we actually become the supplier for most of these guilds, right? Eventually, if everyone wants to get into this game, then they need to have like a provider for all of these assets. And we became that. So that's the birth of like BreederDAO in general.
No doubt. So a little bit inspired by Axie Infinity. I definitely should have mentioned off the top that you were joining us from Philippines. So that's really cool, as we're always a global show. We've spoken to a few different people in East Asia, Southeast Asia before. So it's always great to touch base and from a different corner of the world for sure. Yeah, everything you said makes a lot of sense. I have my criticisms of Axie Infinity. I think the criticism has always been that it should be a little more fun and a little less just grinding away, but at least they made them cute, right? So that's got to count for something. No, that's awesome. And you mentioned guilds as well, which I actually had a question about, because when I was looking around your site, they seem to play a pretty major role. Can you define maybe for the audience a little bit, what is a guild, maybe in the gamer context, and then we can talk about how they're important in the Web3 gaming space?
Right. So a guild is basically a clan, right? Your group that would actually help you depending on what kind of genre, what kind of game type you're actually playing, right? If it's an MMORPG, usually you use them to actually go in raids, kill bosses, and the like, right? Now, in the context of Web3, they kind of change it in a way because initially when Axie Infinity kind of started and all of these like play to earn kind of like started as well, there was a huge friction, right, in terms of having to buy an asset in order to play.
Right.
Free to play was a thing, but with Web3, because you own your asset, you technically need to buy it, right?
Mhm.
And so because at one point, I think the price of the assets in order to create or in order to play an Axie reached like $800, right? People were like, I'm an ordinary Filipino. My minimum wage a month doesn't even reach that, right? So why would I invest like maybe $800 if my monthly wage is only $300?
Right.
And so guilds were kind of created in the sense that they would immediately, or they would actually front the cash necessary to create these assets and then do a revenue sharing with an individual or a scholar, as they call it, right? So that became like the start of the guilds that YGG and all the rest kind of like created within the space. Although I think a lot, and I believe that a lot of these guilds weren't just providing simply financial services to a lot of these individuals. It became some sort of community as well, right?
Right. That's what I was going to ask. That was going to be my follow-up, because I didn't realize that financial component of it and how that played in with Web3.
It was actually pretty huge. It's why 99% of like the guilds are actually, or have actually closed down shop, because it was a pure monetary incentive. Now the guilds that have retained, like the guilds that have retained or do still exist right now, have like a different aspect to it, where it's really driven by community. If you want to learn about Axie Infinity, if you want to learn about Web3, then join my guild, because I'm here to actually help you and educate you and to, tell you like how you can actually not only make money, but how this can actually help your daily life, right? Or how this can, eventually be meaningful to you. So I think the context of guild, at least when it blew up, kind of became super centric, just like with play to earn in general, right? It became, or the entire Web3 concept was siloed to the idea of
speculation took over everything.
right, which you actually mentioned as well, and it's precisely why there's a huge criticism or a drawback around Web3 gaming and the power of blockchain through gaming, because it became like a trading or a speculation game, right? Like it wasn't gaming. People weren't playing it because they wanted to play. In fact, I know a lot of people who would enter the game right from the get-go and then exit once people start entering the actual game, because then they would think that, it's already the top, right? And so it wasn't game. It wasn't really game first.
It wasn't like, let's go have fun. It was like, let's speculate and hope to make some money, jump in, and then
let's
leave.
have fun by making money,
Yeah, someone's got to be my exit liquidity. I'm getting out of here.
right. And that's why a lot of people got discouraged. In general.
Yeah, so what do you think is the remedy for that then, right? Like, how do you see Web3 gaming kind of evolving, I guess, best case scenario?
Right. So, there's a lot of thoughts about like people not distinguishing between a Web 2 and a Web 3. And I personally do agree that, it's not like Web 3 actually brings a new genre of game, right?
Right.
There's just like a new component and an innovation where people get to kind of like own their assets, and it's verifiable on chain. So you as a gamer would feel confident that whatever asset you're actually buying is really yours, and you can do whatever it is that you want with it, right? So school of thoughts involve maybe not even mentioning anything to do with like NFTs. It's just a given fact that eventually people would want to own their assets. Just how like in real life, you have all of these collectibles, you have all of these assets, and it's not like once the developer says, or once the creator says that I'm going to stop shipping these products, I'm going to have to collect like all of those back, right? And, I'm just going to burn them all, right? It's up to you whether or not to keep it, right? And so, following that same thought, right? I kind of believe that eventually blockchain isn't even going to be something, or even NFTs, right? These are things that we wouldn't have to explicitly say that, my game now offers NFTs. All of these assets are NFTs, and you can like freely trade them, because it's already something that people accept as a fact, as part of like gaming in general, that because I actually spent money for this one, or I actually worked hard to actually obtain this, then it's rightfully mine, right?
Yeah.
And
that's interesting. It's a new concept, right? Because I mean, the traditional game developers would push back and say, "Well, we created the environment wherein you found value with this, right? So if we take the environment, why should we let you keep the assets?" And so, how do you foresee that evolving to a space like even right now, right? I think Rockstar just announced they're finally winding down GTA 5, right? After however many millions or billions of dollars people have spent in that space. I'm sure they won't completely do a hard shutdown, but knowing there's nothing new coming, how do you see a situation like that being maybe not avoided, because there's nothing you can do if a developer team decides to shut down the central space, right? But maybe if you've bought digital assets and you have them, in a decentralized wallet that can then be brought into another metaverse or into GTA 6 in this example. Is that kind of the way you would see that kind of evolving?
So in a way, yes. I kind of don't want to touch interoperability yet at the moment because we're still far off from that idea, right? But I think one of the ideas that I really love about blockchain is the composability of it. We talk about IPs and the decentralized nature of like blockchain in general and people getting to own their assets, right? We've seen how Pudgy kind of created like a licensing idea where
and the Bored Apes
users,
too, right?
Kind of, yeah. Where users who actually have these specific traits can license these traits and earn a profit from, the earn profits from the sales of these particular trait specific ones, right? And so kind of imagine like gaming having the same trend where if you actually own an asset and I want to use it for a different game, right? Or I want to create content around it, or maybe even I personally would want to create a content around it, then it can live on, right? It's not up to the developer to make sure that the game lives on. It's up to me, especially if I'm attached to the asset and I want to create like something out of it, something outside of the original creator, then I'm able to do so, right? So we are able to give life on assets that have already been deemed dead, and we've seen a lot of like projects being taken over by the community, projects being taken over by just active community members who really love like the IP or really love like the character, and that ultimately is what I feel like is one of the biggest value adds of blockchain, especially when you attach it to IPs, because the death of the or there's no real death for any kind of like IP, and it can live on as long as someone wants it and someone wants to give life to it.
So that's kind of the secret sauce, is having that network effect, right? Having at least some kind of significant group of people that see the value in this space and the value in these digital assets. And basically they're at least working among themselves, but obviously the hope is that it would expand from there and others will see them having fun there and want to join and that kind of thing. It's just a natural network effect, right?
Yep.
Awesome. So maybe break down a little bit specifically, what is BreederDAO and the goal of BreederDAO, in the context of Web3 gaming and kind of this current space we're in. Like you just mentioned, it's kind of a quieter time right now. 99% of the guilds have shuttered because all the liquidity's gone. So how do you feel BreederDAO is different? And you mentioned a guild as well. Would that be through your BreederDAO Discord, or how do you join your guild?
Oh, yeah, for sure. If you're a guild, then you can definitely just enter Discord, and we have like an exclusive group there only for guilds.
Okay.
I'll give like a background about BreederDAO first. So, as mentioned, BreederDAO really started off with Axie Infinity. We kind of focus on the playable asset side of things, right? Where developers are now more open to, instead of them creating all of the assets themselves, to let the individuals create these assets themselves. Now, mind you, this is a concept that isn't entirely new. We have merchants, blacksmiths, all of those individual characters that have already existed since before. It kind of just became like a bigger thing here because there was a cap in supply, right? And I know that some of the drops are rare from before, but here there's an actual absolute not fixed number where we'll stop at like 10K, right? Okay. And so it kind of became like, the proof of scarcity became like a big driver in terms of people being able to drive value to their assets. And so that's how we really started, right? Creating and producing playable characters, not only to provide to guilds, but also to provide liquidity to all of these markets so that people who would want to enter are able to do so, right? So ultimately, the goal of BreederDAO is to actually become what we would call like the factory of the metaverse, which means that the concept in itself shouldn't just stop within playable assets, right? Now, we started with playable assets in gaming because it was one of the most lucrative market, and it was a common sense, right, for us to be able to actually start there because there's already like a ready demand there. But as a project and as a it's an individual who's driving where we want to go. We believe that assets ultimately are the building blocks of this digital world and economy that we're trying to recreate, right? And so we've expanded since then. You mentioned earlier, about AI skins and being able to craft skins as one of the most common, assets that people would want to have, is something that we've already developed as well. Now, in the future, we won't stop with playable characters or skins. It could be environment creation, anything under the sun that has to do with assets. That's the goal, right? So that's who we are and that's who we want to be.
That's awesome. And when you say these assets, like, is the goal to have an economy around them, or you're really just kind of like making it easy for creators to create them and then kind of build the economy? Because I noticed you have a skin shop, so I'm just bringing the AI skins site up on the screen here for the audience. I'm wondering, what's the kind of end goal for this? Is it like a economy specifically kind of by and for BreederDAO, or how do you see it kind of having network effect into Web3?
Right. So there's definitely going to be an economy, but it's not something that we would be actually closing within the ecosystem. So the goal of BreederDAO, as always, or since the beginning, is to actually provide support to a lot of these projects. I guess to a lot of like these projects, right? And so where we see it eventually, and this is something that we talked about earlier, which is related to interoperability, right? Is that eventually people can move their assets across different spaces. And, projects like AI skins wouldn't just become like a creations platform, but also a distribution platform where we believe that eventually, however you want to look like, maybe in a particular space or a particular game would be the same way as how you would want to look like in a different space or a different channel, right? And so we're exploring a lot in terms of like AI skins, touching on capabilities like physical merchandise or phygital assets, touching on things like AR functionality. And the goal ultimately is to exist in all of these different spaces, not just limited to like Web3 games, but all of these digital and maybe even physical spaces that we exist. Because ultimately what we feel like assets ultimately bring to people would be identity, right? And at the core of it, right, identity is something that we want to bring everywhere. If I'm known for, a red scarf in a particular game, then every time I enter like a new game, I would want to wear like that red scarf because it actually shows that I am me and that, you're dealing with me. And,
I can
like
see
people are like vainish, right? And so they actually want to be known and they want to be proud of the character that they've actually honed and made. So yeah, that's the kind of like goal that we have, not just for kids but for a lot of like the things that we do here.
That's awesome. And so, like, do you see that the adoption kind of moving in one direction or the other? Like, I feel like there's almost this competition between Web3 gaming and the metaverse, even though they're obviously very similar, like cousins. But when I look at these digital assets, right, I look at them as wearables I would wear into Decentraland, for example, or one of these, or Sandbox or something like that. Whereas, in the Web3 gaming space, I feel like the digital assets are a little more specific to a specific game, right? So do you differentiate between kind of the metaverse and Web3 games, or do you, like, is it all just kind of the same big universe?
Right. So I think right now it's hard to actually just consolidate all of these things into one big, like, huge universe. Now, people are saying that eventually all of these metaverse are going to be connected and like, you can transport one asset from one to another. But I think we're far off from there. It's why in terms of how we're actually executing things, we're thinking on the side, both on the developers and the users, right? We can't expect all of the developers to follow a singular standard where everyone is going to build off that, right? Or like everyone will have like the same dimensions, the same, file format, and that's going to be, or we're able to transfer that from one world to another. And so what we're doing within our group is that every asset that you create, we already allow you to convert it into a different file format that can now be uploaded across different like platforms. So there's what you call like an AR export file, which can be used as like an AR filter on social media platforms like Instagram or Facebook. You have a .glb file, which which you said can be used like on the Decentraland. You have a .vox file or a .vxf file, which can be used for Sandbox. So we're already laying down the groundwork to make it easy for both the developers and for the users to be able to use all of these assets across different platforms, even though their standards are quite different from each other. So instead of like letting them do the work of like converting it, of like allowing these assets, we're already doing that for them, creating all sorts of like things at the back end, and then just making it easy for them to allow the users to enjoy the experience of bringing one asset from
That's
one
awesome.
world.
So once you buy the NFT of these digital assets, you have the option to download the file type that you want, like between the voxel or the GLB or the other ones.
Yeah, so we started with GLB, where we're actually in the process of creating or pushing out like other stuff, like that FBX file, which is commonly used for Unreal games.
Right,
and
Unreal, a little bit higher fidelity.
Yep. So the goal is to actually allow or provide all of these asset types to the users or file formats so that they're able to upload it in the different ones. Or if once we're ready with the integrations with all of these other games or all of these other worlds, then we can do it for them, right? And it's nice that standards like 6551 or ERC 6551 already exist, because now we can actually host these different NFTs under a singular NFT so that the experience for the user is actually going to be seamless. And, a lot of people have been saying that that's one of the biggest gaps right now, at least gaming, right? Because the idea of like NFTs, especially with a wallet, with having to trade it in a different platform outside of, the game's marketplace, kind of like discourages users from even entering, right? And so, building up the infrastructure to allow for convenience is very crucial, especially if you want this to really reach mass adoption.
No doubt, that coveted mass adoption. We hear it so much. I don't know what's gonna happen when we get there. I'm almost scared of what happens when we get there, but I'm happy with the building right now. Are you familiar with Ready Player Me as a concept? Like, they're kind of trying to take this interoperability angle, whereas obviously it's very centralized, so there's that side of it, but it is they're signing up with different metaverses. So if you have your one Ready Player Me avatar, you can jump into different metaverses with it. Would you say that's kind of the right direction, or how do you view that concept?
I think it could be a step, right? Being able to allow an avatar, for example, to be integrated across like different worlds is a step in the right direction. Although how we're imagining it in the future is that you don't have to conform to a singular avatar or like to a singular form of avatar. In fact, you can just supposedly create whatever it is that you want. And with the advancement of AI, it can actually help you convert that or dynamically convert that into something that's readily available or readily usable for a particular platform. And so, if you want to create like, I don't know, a cute penguin, for example, and then use that as your avatar. Most of the ones on Ready Player Me are like humans or human-like characters, right? And so if I want to be a penguin, like, and I don't want to be human, like, can I just be a penguin? And so, eventually I foresee that kind of idea where projects like Ready Player Me are going to take it a step further, or some of the projects who are actually working on like these stuff right now are going to take it a step further, where you don't have to conform to a particular standard. It doesn't have to be like a human-like character. It can be whatever character you want. And then we use the power of AI to, dynamically change the components within like the particular avatar to make it responsive or to make it usable for a particular world.
Oh, that's amazing. That definitely makes sense. So I'm reading on your site talking about the asset creation side of what BreederDAO does, and looking at, being able to kind of enable generating NFTs that are really tailored to specification. So I know this kind of goes back to what you were saying about how you don't have to call it blockchain, right? You don't have to call it NFTs maybe, and the technology just becomes so ubiquitous that, you know, NFTs are used as an asset, like a special kind of asset within the game, but not necessarily like we're a Web3 or we're NFT game, you know? How do you see that working? Like, and what do you mean when you say, you know, you generate NFTs tailored to specification?
Right. So, I'll break it down because it kind of changes depending on what asset we're creating. On the playable asset side of things, which is, you know, the creation of Axes, the creation of Pegasus, how we really started off was because there are like different traits, right, and different body parts. If you're like a guild who approaches us, we'll ask you what you want, right? Is it, you know, a particular asset that contains these specific traits? If so, then we're able to create that for you. And there's an algorithm around that and allows you to, you know, increase the probability of a particular trait appearing and for that to be able to use by, you know, different individuals. Now, I think you're familiar with this one, but the quality of the Axie, the quality of the asset that you have directly affects your earnings, at least back then, right? And your ability to win in the game is kind of like determined as well by the quality of the asset that you have. So that one was crucial. And so tailoring that specific to the play style of the individual, as well as, you know, generally what are the strongest ones or the strongest like traits like within the game, became kind of like crucial, especially for the guild owners. Now, the side of like the skins and wearables, how we're actually tailoring it, and if you've actually gone to the AI skins shop, there's an upload functionality there where you can choose to, you know, have or like upload your own print, and that print will be actually used as an inspiration to be able to generatively create like these 3D wearables that you can now choose and select from, right? So having that personalization aspect is how we make it like tailored to, you know, user specification, and we deem that as like one of the most important facets, because what's the point of like earning it if I can't really do anything about it, or it's not actually to my liking, right? If at the end of the day, like these are all designed by, I mean, I'm not okay. I mean, I'm definitely not opposed to like people designing it for me, especially if it looks cool already. But like the optionality of being able to help in the creation process, or to actually put some edits just because, you know, I want to, is an option, right? And so that's what we're allowing people to do so.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. Yeah, I was tinkering around on the AI skins and tried to make my own, but it didn't work out. I don't know if I chose the wrong kind of image or whatever, but no, it's really cool. And it's a really cool concept, the idea that it's kind of community-led. Sorry?
We can work on that later.
I'll figure it out. You mentioned Pegasus, or Pegasus. I don't know how you pronounce that. Pegasus. Yeah, it reminds me of Zed Run. Are you familiar with Zed Run? It's like another NFT-based kind of horse racing game. Could you break down how Pegasus works and maybe how the NFT assets, so there's the racing side of it. So they're very cool, high-tech for those listening on audio only. I have it up on the screen. They're very cool, high-tech horses with wings, essentially, Pegasus, obviously. But they look like robot style. And so you can race, you can breed, and you can rent the horses. Tell us a little bit about Pegasus and what BreederDAO created with them.
Sure. It's like mecha horses, actually.
Meta horse race. Let's go.
The concept is like pretty similar to how Axie did it, at least in terms of like the creation of assets. So in order to breed Axie, in order to breed like Pegasus or Pegas, you need to combine like a male horse and like a female horse, right? And so the idea is that you actually use these horses. And they each have like their own traits, right? And they have, you know, different elements as well. And the stadiums kind of differ, right? Now it's a passive horse racing game, at least back then when we were producing assets for them. And then when a lot of people kind of like onboarded. So it's more of like watching a horse betting game and just betting horse, right? So
but you own the horses that are in it. So like the person that owns the horse can generally win more. Is that how it works, or it's just straight betting?
Yeah. So there was no betting involved, at least during that time. So it was mostly if you win, then you actually get like the share of the earnings, right? But again, it was quite random because you have no participation in
Right.
the
It's totally random. Like, not, what about your stats? Like, do the stats of each PEGA like impact the
Oh yeah, the
race?
stats do affect.
Yeah.
The stats do affect it. High speed, for example, and even the breed of like the horses. So there are certain breeds that are normally faster than the rest. So people were optimizing all of these things as well. But because there's a randomness to it, right? You don't really know, and even the stadiums are kind of random. So there's a lot of like elements going around it that people kind of tried to optimize for, especially to maximize their earning. Right now, I think they're developing, or I think they've already launched the beta for the horse racing game, where you actually can actively participate, and you can kind of control or generate or create or activate like boost, so that the user can also partake in the racing, and it can actually
get the
kind
timing
of like
down.
giving like a Mario Kart vibe, right?
Yeah.
And I guess like very timely, especially since we're on the road to making all of these games more fun, and like having participation from like users in general. So yeah, that's where I think they're at. And the studio itself is quite interesting because they're not just developing one game, and they're developing like multiple games. And I'm pretty excited to see not only just them, right, but for all of these studios to start generating games that are not solely focused on the earning side of things,
Right.
but on like games that people would actually game regardless
Actually have
of
fun, right?
Yeah,
no doubt. And yeah, it's amazing. That's interesting that they're focused on that. How do you think these studios are handling, the market as it is right now? And to your point, maybe that's the calculation, right? It's like, okay, well, speculation's gone. We can't really rest on this idea of like making a lot of money in this game. How do we get people to play it and make these studios still, function and worth it, right? And that the solution is make it more fun, right? So how are they navigating this kind of adaptation? Because they didn't seem to worry about that too much, prior.
Yeah, honestly, for me, it's actually pretty good, at least environment-wise, because the genre of like games that we've seen, especially when Axie Infinity kind of boomed and like the entire concept was play to earn, right? It was kind of like all similar, right? It was a copy of a copy of a copy, now on a different chain, or maybe a different IP or a different character, right? Turn a particular asset, for example, from like a fish to a horse, or a horse to a crab. That became like the theme around gaming, or at least blockchain gaming during that time. So we didn't really see like a lot of genre, we didn't really see a lot of innovation. Games were actually building games for the sake of getting in early and riding the hype, right? It wasn't like games for games first, right? And so given the slowdown in the industry right now, like games are undergoing the same framework as how typical game studios would actually do it, right? Those that are just genuinely building a good game for the sake of like developing like a good game. And so for me, that's an improvement, right?
Yeah, for
because
sure.
that's ultimately what we're supposed to do, right? As game developers, providing nice content for individuals where they wanna, which will provide like entertainment for them, not in the form of like monetary, but like in the form of like what an actual game should really do.
Right.
Developments around Apple allowing for like NFTs this time actually open up the gates for a lot of these developers as well, because you post like a good question: how do I now reach the masses if it's not about like providing the aspect of like earning? Apple, Google have proven that they're able, or that these platforms already immediately allow access to a broader audience. And so like having your game published there or like listed there will automatically enable growth in terms of users. And so these are the things that have been like pretty exciting for me. And a lot of individuals are just saying that they can't really wait for the next bull run, right?
Iterating for the next bull run. I like that.
Honestly, once we really take in blockchain as like a component of like game, and not having to do with, just the idea of like being able to earn from it, right? Then it shouldn't matter whether it's bull or bear. I think games would be the first industry, at least on the blockchain industry side, that would be kind of like agnostic. So whether it's bull or bear, if you're able to create a good game, then it's gonna drive like growth. It's gonna drive like sales for your assets.
Yeah, most definitely. I see that happening right now with the ones that are building out. Personally, I've been watching this project called Unioverse. Are you familiar with it?
No, actually.
Yeah, so their Unioverse is they've got some people from the Grand Theft Auto 5 and Rockstar team, like former, like I don't know how many generations, 1 or 2 generations ago, kind of on the team along with a bunch of other kind of writers and builders. But it's been interesting the way they're teasing it out, because they have been just kind of airdropping a lot of tokens to their community, and then the tokens are like your early access, right? So you get a bunch of in-game currency for having the tokens, and then they started slowly releasing like characters, so you can get these characters, and some are more rare than others, and they have a actual game, like a demo kind of game of a shooter game where you're just like running around and using the actual character that you own, so you're able to actually see your playable asset in a game that's running around and shooting. So yeah, I'll send you a link for that one. It's a pretty cool concept of to your point about needing to make it fun, and then the goal, the hope is that as it becomes more and more fun, those who were there early got all these super rare assets that are never available anymore, right? So they will in theory go up in value in the future, but also they just have a whole bunch of utility within the game that gives them some special perks and stuff. So it's also more fun and potentially more valuable. Although them too, I've heard, as far as budgets go, it's still a little bit difficult, because you're always kind of relying on sales on the blockchain to actually make that revenue, So it's interesting. And I was wondering, do you have a kind of favorite type of Web3 game? Do you see a certain type working more than others? I've seen a lot of like game collector card games, kind of. I've seen a lot of kind of trial type games, like the one that the Bored Apes released, which looked kind of cool, Dookie Dash. That might be one of the funner ones I've seen released. Unioverse that I was just mentioning is kind of a first person shooter, but they're also going for a broader kind of adventure game kind of look. Yeah, and we just talked about Pegasus, and there's Zed Run as well, which are kind of like randomized horse racing games. So there's a lot of different kind of Web3 games out there already, actually. Do you have a certain kind that's like resonating with you, or that you see the most potential in?
Well, I don't think it's any different from general Web2 games. I'm still pretty bullish on like generally FPS as well as like combat RPG games. Right. There's not going to be any distinction for me in the future, and as long as like we build out games that are actually really fun and like up to their liking, then I think it would make sense for us to kind of like merge both Web2 and Web3 game under one umbrella, right? It's inevitable, especially once we have like games that have actually proven to also work despite having like a blockchain component. I think it's inevitable that it's a win-win for I guess it's a huge win for the users if they're able to really own their assets, right? And if they can actually choose to sell it outside of like the game developer itself, right? We've seen a lot of like games banning like secondary sales because ultimately it's less revenue for the developers. But I think users deserves more, right?
Yeah, and like, people often find ways around those, which I've also heard from those criticizing Web3, like, I already sell my assets, it can be done. It's like, yeah, technically you can, but you're not actually owning it in your own sovereign way on the blockchain, or in any real way. You don't actually own it. You're just skirting the rules and swapping wallets with somebody else for a cost, something like that.
I think it's underrated. Just because you can do it right now doesn't mean you can do it perpetually. I think what's really underrated right now in blockchain is that we're making it the same for everything, right? And so you might be able to do it in this game just because you've already studied through the economy and then learned the ropes of it. But like, try doing that for another game, right? You would need to go through the same exercise as you did before.
Yeah, that's a lot of time and effort just to figure out how you might be able to sell something, and hopefully you don't get caught and they take away all your shit.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
crazy.
I mean, eventually it's going to be like something that people would assume to be a given fact,
right?
And so now games who actually have a different approach would then be criticized, right? So right now we're criticized for our approach, but eventually it's going to be the opposite, right?
I like it. I like it. And, I'm still waiting for that kind of Mass Effect vision of like just going around the universe and finding random resources and actually being able to like buy and sell them and have those resources connected to different assets.
Right.
One that I've seen actually looking towards that from the closest I've seen so far is Star Atlas, which is actually on Solana. So I was going to ask you, how do you feel about other blockchains? I know I've definitely seen you guys have a pretty close connection with Polygon, and I know Pegasus and I believe Axie as well are using Matic, and the layer 2 Ethereums in general. I've seen Avalanches coming along quite a bit too. They seem to be kind of leading the pack for sure, and definitely in the whole metaverse conversation, Ethereum's kind of the only game in town almost, it seems like, which is kind of sad, but that's the way it seems to be right now. So how do you feel about blockchains in general? Do you have a favorite, and how do you see it kind of evolving from here?
Well, personally, personal bias is that I'd always gonna go for like ETH just because it has proven history.
Yeah.
And we all know like ETH really has like the highest liquidity among all of these other chains, right?
Of course.
But as a gamer, honestly, I don't think like, a singular chain will kind of dominate it, right? Or honestly, people don't even need to know like what chain it's on, right? As long as it does the work, then you should be able to play it, right? It's one of the things that I mentioned earlier where user experience has to come first, and definitely creating all of these chains and, siloing ourselves or making it exclusive for that particular chain, is it going to cut it? Which is why most of the people right now are actually making it chain agnostic as well, or they kind of like start off like with one chain and then eventually like, allowing for all of the other EVMs or even like, the Solana ones to also participate, because a game isn't supposed to like, block people off, or you wouldn't want people blocked off just because they don't understand like a particular chain. You're not even selling the chain at this point. You're just simply selling the game. And so for us, we work with all sorts of games. We work with all sorts of like assets. It doesn't matter to us whether you're actually the only game that's building on, say Aptos or Sui, right? We all know that's not true, but we'll work with you, right? Because as mentioned, like our goal is to become the factory of the metaverse, and it's not just gonna be a factory of like, a singular chain. It's gonna be like every single one that's actually building here, and we want to be provide support and cater to their needs as well, right?
And as much as I have, some criticisms of Axie Infinity, overall, the idea that kind of the place that benefited economically from Axie Infinity and kind of that original boost of Web3 gaming would then give birth to the factory of Web3 gaming. I think it's right.
Sure.
It just feels right because now, there's all kinds of abundance and value and opportunity that's going to come from that. And I can see what you're doing, like BreederDAO.io. Everyone check it out. It's definitely really impressive. I can see the vision. I can see, where you're heading, and definitely having that resume of Axie Infinity and a few other titles that have been fairly successful will help you kind of springboard into the future. I did want to speak on the specific DAO angle of it, right? So I noticed, you're the chief executive officer. You clearly have kind of an executive board function, which a lot of DAOs do. But the DAO as a decentralized autonomous organization does also kind of lean into empowering community, right? And the idea that everyone within your DAO has a voice. So how important are DAOs, do you think? And how is BreederDAO kind of handling the governance side of things?
Right. I think eventually DAOs could play like a huge role, especially when determining or running all of these organizations, right? But I think it's also worth noting that right now, people are like as community member, I'm involved with probably 100 different DAOs, right?
Wow.
And it's not like I can really focus on a particular DAO and really drive growth for a particular DAO outside of maybe the major decision-making ones, right? So for me right now, at least, like for most DAOs, and I'm not gonna, exclude ours because I feel like we're also encountering the same issues and the same criticism, right? DAO holders are more of like your shareholders at this point, where they kind of are invested in the growth of the community and the growth of like the project in general, but they can't really have like an active or that big of an active participation to really drive the growth of any project. It's why a core team is still needed. It's why, even though we start, or we call ourselves like a DAO, we're not fully decentralized, we're not fully autonomous, we don't hand over like everything to the community, because it doesn't make sense, right? People actually join the project and even purchase a token because they kind of believe in the leadership. And even though we say that we want a fully democratized one, right, or a fully decentralized one, we all know that people have their own biases and they choose to follow more than lead, right? So it's gonna take a step further to be able to really achieve like a proper DAO, one that's really a flat structure, and people are the ones governing it, this instead of just like a few individuals at the top. But I think it's a process, right? And like for us, we can't just hand it over to them without even knowing who they are, right? At this point, we don't even know like who's qualified to be able to lead this. And a huge part of the DAO would also be your investors, right? So you owe it to your investors to actually lead them to success. And definitely just putting it up in the air and just saying that we're a DAO, and so we're not supposed to be taking charge in terms of where we're going to drive the growth of this one. That's quite irresponsible, at least in my perspective, right? And so eventually I think DAOs would make sense, especially once you have worlds where there's like it's already self-sustaining. People are creating all sorts of things within your world, right? Or like digital economy is become something that everyone kind of like assumes to be a given fact, right? But yeah, I think DAOs are especially crucial right now because they're your community base, right? And even if they're not as active, the way they actually participate in it should tell you what actually matters to them. And what matters to them kind of is very important right now, especially for a product that hasn't reached like a product market fit, right? And we're all just looking for that product market fit. And who knows, right? We don't even know if this particular market is going to be the market that we're really going to be catering to, 1 to 2 years down the line, especially
you're ready to adapt.
And once a bull market comes and another set of like individuals gets interested in the space, So but like these core individuals are actually pretty crucial for me, because these are the guys who are really in a way in it for the tech, right? And understands, or despite experiencing a bear market, didn't necessarily just leave and decided that it's not worth their time, right? So these are people who are going to stay, and it's nice to actually be in touch with them and get that sense of what's important to them and how can we as a community and maybe even as a DAO improve so that we stay relevant and we become important to the next generation who are going to be involved in this process.
No doubt. That's amazing. You dropped a lot of gems there, I think, on the concept of DAOs and the realities of DAOs as well. And definitely, I like that you kind of spoke of the need for a leadership team. And I'm on a few DAOs as well. Definitely not 100, but I'd say 5 or 6 maybe. I'm on the leadership team of 1 or 2 as well. And one that has folded recently, unfortunately. But to your point, it's like, there's always some kind of point of centralization. I think it's necessary. But I'm looking at your site and you've got a pretty big team, at least on the BreederDAO leadership, and I think that's important too, right? How important is it to have at least with your leadership team, 5 to 7 to 10 people, how important is a diversity of voices as well, women to men, maybe different backgrounds. So how have you kind of navigated that governing and representing, the best you can on the leadership team?
Right. So I think it depends on the needs of the business for sure. But the way we thought about it is that every single facet needs to be properly represented, right? We have someone who's actually in charge of people and DAO specifically, because we believe that the road from the community to us is kind of a struggle, right? You don't expect like everyone to just simply message me and for me to be able to respond to all of these inquiries, right? So having someone to facilitate and collecting those voices is very crucial. most of it is actually taken off like the typical startup like leadership team, or you have people like finance, you have people like operations, and it depends really on like where where your business is headed and how you're thinking through things. For us, of course, tech is always a given, right? We're a blockchain company for a reason. We're creating products that involves technology,
No doubt.
right? Stuff like finance, for example, these are things that people might think is secondary, and but why is it actually very crucial for us? Because like treasury management, first and foremost, is something that people don't kind of like give minds into, or they actually think that it's something secondary to them. But I mean, you won't even last long if you don't do proper treasury management. And again, like you owe it to people, right, to be able to perfectly manage your treasury instead of just buying like all of these shit coins or like buying all of these ETH.
Well, and for some DAOs, it's even getting to a point where your treasury has liquidity, right? Where it has something,
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess like it really depends, right, on the goal of the project or the business. But for us, it's really like understanding who we're catering to, what we're actually delivering to the individuals, and then how do we make sure that we get like the most perspectives or the most number of perspectives as much as possible, so that we're able to in a way cover like all fronts and consider all possibilities, right?
Amazing. Well, we're going to slowly start winding down here, but I do appreciate these insights. It's really amazing. I'm looking at your website, and it's kind of talking about inclusiveness, humility. I kind of jumped over to the governance side of BreederDAO, and I'm wondering, what's the reach of BreederDAO right now? I think everybody in Web3, at least, especially if you're interested in the gaming side of Web3, is familiar with Axie Infinity, and personally, I always loved the story of how Web3 gaming was, like you just said at the beginning of our interview, making opportunities for people who were really hard on their luck, and especially during COVID, you kept hearing those good stories. Then you heard some of the not so good side of things too. But overall, the idea of creating opportunities seems to be huge, right? And specifically in the Philippines. But how international is BreederDAO? And definitely, creating economic opportunity in the Philippines. It seems most of your leadership team seems to be based there. What is the vision for kind of the global inclusivity of BreederDAO?
Right. Actually, our network is quite global at the moment.
Nice.
You can see, even though like most of the team is actually based off here, just because it's much easier to communicate working off like the same time zone, right? We have individuals who are actually based out of South America and other like Asia Pacific regions, right?
Nice.
So for us, if you look at the base of investors that we have, it's actually quite holistic. A bit biased towards the West, but in general, there's actually a lot of individuals there that are from different countries, right? And so we actually have that global inclusiveness from the get-go. And the community itself, we never kept it to just Filipinos, right?
Of course, yeah.
The reason why it makes sense for us to actually have a leadership team here and to have like most of the individuals based out of here was because a huge part of like the business, at least at the start, were driven by guilds, right? And most of the guilds were actually born out of like the Philippines as well.
Okay.
So it more or less made sense to actually establish like a team here or a presence here. At least with a team side, but we're actually working with a lot of games, a lot of like projects who are not based out of here. In fact, most of them are not based out of here because there are only a handful of real projects that are based out of the Philippines. But we're definitely in contact with them. In terms of like games, we're partnered with over 40, most of which are based, or actually none of which are based out of the Philippines. And so we're global, and we're really trying to, as mentioned earlier, we're really trying to become the factory of the metaverse that's agnostic, and that's one of the beauties of blockchain, right? Even though you come from like the Philippines, there's no like blocking you geographically, right? To be able to meet
the borders are gone in the metaverse.
Exactly. I mean, as long as you have the internet, then you can actually be connected with someone from abroad, right? And so we're taking the same approach, right? We're not going to be biased towards specific countries. I mean, maybe in terms of like go to market, right? Especially where the demand is,
Mhm.
but like we're not gonna block off anyone for participation or for participating, especially if they choose to do so, right? You can think
Awesome.
of it as like a community of like people who are just really invested in the creation of like assets and maybe even distribution of it across the different digital spaces.
Awesome. Awesome. And how is it in, well, the Philippines specifically, and then maybe in the more general area as well, looking at the evolution of Web3, the adoption of Web3, you know, obviously Axie Infinity made a huge splash in the Philippines, but beyond that, is Web3 as a technology kind of taking off in the country? And how is it, you know, as a network, you know, to your point about needing to have things more community-based guilds. I think it starts at the local level, right? IRL, in real life, you know, speaking to people on the ground. So what's the general kind of feedback that you get when talking about Web3 and blockchain to the average Filipinos?
So, well, typically we don't even like say that, you know, it's blockchain
Right.
because we feel like that's a already like that already creates like a huge friction point, right? If you led with like, or if you lead with like terms that as an individual I don't even understand anymore, then why am I even talking to you, right? And you know, even though adoption was quite huge here when Axie Infinity first onboarded, right? People didn't necessarily understood like what blockchain has to offer aside from, you know, I can sell my assets. In fact, I don't even know if they understood that it was blockchain that enabled for that functionality. Because as long as they're getting the funds, then I don't really care like what's powering it, right? The same manner as like people don't really understand what goes behind like the internet because we were actually just born into it, right? Me being able to talk to you right now, I don't understand like how Google actually, you know, projects my image to yours, right? Or your image to mine. It's just, it was just handed to me and I'll take it, right? And so, you know, I think a lot of like the building is happening more on the infrastructure side. And maybe even to a certain extent, like utility for the technology itself. Because DeFi is one, right? Decentralized finance. It was actually like a huge use case because you know, you reduce like the operational inefficiencies, having to go to a bank, having to subject yourself to, you know, operating hours, having to, you know, build that relationship with account managers and the like, right? So I think like two things. The first one would be reducing like friction for people to enter, treating it the same as like, you know, internet, where it's already an underlying technology that I don't really have to understand for me to be able to participate in or for me to be able to use it. And then the second would be, you know, just generally creating utility for different individuals on how it can actually improve their lives or how it's actually a step higher that one than what they have right now. So conversations like, you know, maybe this is something that blockchain can empower. We've spoken with the likes of, you know, World Health Organization on how they can maybe store their database in the blockchain so that at least it's immortalized and you're not actually relying on local servers to actually store it, and that anyone who would want to verify it can actually verify it. Now, these are use cases that we feel like blockchain can definitely provide, but because like there's a lack of, you know, infrastructure that can provide the ease in terms of like making these happen, then we're not yet there, right? So eventually we feel like once we start building up the infrastructure, then these conversations are going to be easy because we don't have to actually tell them that it's run by blockchain, right? It's also why Telegram bots are becoming a thing because, you know, of course, like security and owning your seed phrase is actually very important and all of that. But as a user, do I really want that, right? Or do I want, or am I okay with a bit of like centralization, just to be able
custodial wallet or something?
Yeah, just to be able to ease that, you know, onboarding experience for me, right? We all know that, you know, the same as how we actually treat centralized versus decentralized entities, right? Some people just want what's convenient, right? It doesn't matter whether it's not like government's out to get me, that I have to protect all my seed phrases, right? I'm a small fish in the pond. And so why do I have to go through all of these hassle just to be able to participate in this, right? So there's a lot of things going around here. And ultimately, users just want it easy, right? And making it easy would be the first and foremost thing that we should do.
Convenience is the enemy of sovereignty, maybe, though, right? It's like the more convenient you want it, the less sovereign it becomes. And then, not your keys, not your cryptos, not your keys, not your NFTs,
I mean, it might take a while, right? But we can't just completely go from a centralized one to a decentralized one. Maybe take like steps, like
as long as that off ramp is clear, right? As long as you got that clear off ramp to the blockchain, you can get out of the custodial wallet. No, it's amazing, man. I'm totally there with you. So one of my last questions, looking at the creator economy and this idea of the digital assets kind of buying and selling, like that's what really pulled me into NFTs and the metaverse. How important is it to you, the creator economy side of it, like the building and then the selling and really creating your own little micro economy within the metaverse? Like, how do you see that evolving, and how important do you think the creator economy is to Web3 gaming?
Right. Well, I think in general, the creator economy is one of the biggest growing industries, right? Like, even though I'm from the Philippines, right? I've seen and experienced like a lot of these larger artists kind of like also participating and lowering themselves down just to become like creator economy, just because like the potential is much larger, right? And in fact, even businesses here on the more traditional side aren't even looking at like the bigger names anymore. They're just trying to look at micro influencers to actually bring their product to market, because conversion rates are higher, right? And so I'm seeing the same thing happening here, because eventually people will have different wants, different needs, and a particular personality wouldn't really be able to catch all of them, right? Instead of trying to go for like a singular person, a single individual where you allocate all your budget into, why not just go with 10 of those who have different cohorts or who have different profiles, and then reach like a better target, right? So individuals or creators having their power, especially in the digital space, to create and to be able to share it with their users is definitely gonna be like a big thing in the future. And since a lot of them are actually in the digital space, right, already, then what's the fastest way to deliver all of these goods and assets than them being digital themselves in nature, right? And we imagine a world where eventually maybe digital assets would be given more importance than physical ones, right? Where our digital identity is actually more crucial than our physical one, just because our digital identity can go anywhere and everywhere, and our physical identity is limited by the resources or by the scarce resources that we have here, which, by the way, is already slowly depleting. So yeah, in a way, you can think of it as like how we seen like Ready Player One implemented theirs, where people would just maybe have like a bed and maybe have some food, but most of the even the businesses are actually done online and digitally, and that could be a potential future, right? Although I do think maybe not to that extent, but it could be a possibility, right?
That's more like Ready Player One right there. It's a little dystopian.
So yeah, like that's the idea, right?
Yeah, no, you're not the first guest to make that that statement about, maybe it's the other way around, and it's really, the difficulty is being pulled back into reality, and that we're spending a lot of time in the digital world, But
at that point, what is even real, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's the other point that's been made by others as well on this show, is shouldn't even be calling it in real life versus not real, right? Because the digital life is just an extension of your real life. It's not like it's not real. It's just as real, when we're talking to people in video game worlds. Those are real people you're talking with and having, different interactions with. So most definitely just a new layer of reality for sure. Well, I think we hit on a lot of important notes here. I'm really excited about what BreederDAO is working on. I thank you so much, Renz, for joining and really dropping these gems. Especially I like the blockchain agnostic piece and how you want to be the factory of the metaverse. I definitely wish you success in that goal. And I think it's a good, ambitious goal to have. And it's awesome that, you're based in the Philippines. You're bringing economic, engine to the Philippines and more value into the whole space globally. So it's really exciting. Is there any final words you want to share or any points you want to make before we wind down here?
Well, first and foremost, it's been a pleasure talking to you, David. For us, like, if you really love like what we do, then join us in the charge, right? So, I mean, don't just wait for the bull market before saying that it's actually worth your time to participate in it, because we're building out the infrastructure to be able to allow for greater mass adoption, right? So we're working hard so that eventually people don't have to actually go through the same route as us, don't have to experience these things. And if you love that, like, join us as early as now. So
Sweet.
Yeah, thanks so much, David.
Thank you. It's all about getting more bodies into the metaverse, and I'll definitely be jumping into that Discord. Everyone can check out their website at breederdao.io, or you can follow Renz on Twitter at RENZ_BDAO, BDAO. Renz from BreederDAO, head breeder in chief. It's awesome. Well, thank you for joining from the Philippines, and really excited about this opportunity to talk to you. And I hope that our audience has gained a lot of knowledge. And yeah, that's awesome. We'll be back next week live from the metaverse. Until then, we'll catch you all in the metaverse. Peace out, everybody.
Thank you, David.